Hi there, everyone. Member of Parliament Garnet Janis here. Very pleased to be with Jamil Jivani today. We're talking about the Canada Strong and Free Network, which was formerly called the Manning Centre, which Jamil now leads, and their upcoming networking conference. We're also talking about political discrimination and Bill C-257, a bill that I've put forward aimed at combating political discrimination. So, Jamil, first of all, thanks so much for coming on my page today.
Yeah, great to be with you, and appreciate you making time to talk about these important issues. We need more folks like you in Parliament, that's for sure.
Well, thank you for that. Uh, let's kick off before we start talking about the bill and the issue of political discrimination. Just tell us a bit about the conference. Maybe some folks have been in the past, but they haven't been in a while because of COVID. What's new? What's exciting? Who are the speakers that are coming? What should people expect, and how do they register?
Yeah, well, it's going to be at the Westin, Ottawa on March 22nd to 24th, so just 3 weeks away. I highly encourage people to come out. It's going to be a fantastic 3 days, very unique mix of political leaders, business leaders, grassroots organizers and activists, conservative media personalities. There's nothing like this anywhere else all year, where you get a full cross section of the different folks that make the conservative movement what it is. And the important thing that we're doing too is we're bringing different generations together. We're going to have Preston Manning on stage, Stephen Harper on stage, also Pierre Poilievre on stage, Danielle Smith, of course, you, Garnett. And so it's really important for us that conservatives who are Zoomers, millennials, boomers, everybody feels like they can be part of this conversation. And I think ultimately what we're trying to do is draw attention to what are the challenges facing middle class communities and families across Canada, and what are the solutions that conservatives can bring to the table. You can register at Canada Strong and Free network and get your tickets now. The early bird prices expire on Monday, so get them while they're there.
Okay, so good time for us to be doing this conversation then. I know I've been in past years and looking forward to being there again this year. We did just post a comment for those following on my page, where you can just click that link directly. So hope we get some folks who are following this discussion that are interested in registering and being part of that networking conference. So it's interesting that you highlighted specifically kind of the intergenerational aspect of it, because of course, there are things that tie us all together as conservatives, a common set of values, but there are also different challenges. I think younger people who are working out their conservative principles in the context of a different stage of life, but also probably a different kind of university environment than our parents and grandparents went through, are maybe looking at different challenges. And I see this issue of political discrimination that we're going to talk about actually as being a particular issue that's impacting younger conservatives. I mean, conservatives in general, but younger conservatives. What's your sense of some of the different issues that you're hearing about from different generations of conservatives that may be newer issues today compared to what was talked about in the past?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about political discrimination being one, and we'll certainly get to that. But in addition to that issue, of course, the one top of mind for many people is housing affordability. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
was a time in Canada where we could guarantee if you worked hard, if you put your time into a job, a career, you saved your money, you would be able to pass some assets on to the next generation. You could make sure your kids had a better life than you had. People from all over the world came to Canada hoping for that promise. And it's just not a guarantee anymore. I mean, the reality is that if you're a parent that has multiple kids, you don't have multiple homes to pass on to them, and your kids might not be able to afford a house of their own these days. Certainly, my family is in that situation. So I think that's a really huge difference in terms of generations. But another important one, too, is just understanding that diversity has changed in so many positive ways in our generation, and yet we have a liberal status quo that wants to tell us that we're racist, that we're intolerant, that denies the progress that's been made. And one of the hard parts of that is it's trying to stifle free speech and debate, and it's one of the things we've seen around the election interference issue, and Justin Trudeau coming out and saying, well, it's racist to ask questions about this. I mean, we live in a time with a very diverse generation of millennials, very diverse generation of Zoomers, And I think we need to be prepared to push back on attempts to control us as though progress hasn't been made and change hasn't occurred in our communities.
Yeah. So discussions around diversity and then housing affordability are, I think, very much top priorities for young conservatives. Those are great points. So political discrimination. Of course, you lead the Strong and Free Network, but you also have your own experience with political discrimination, and this is something we've talked about. So before setting up the bill, could you share a bit about your own experience of political discrimination and how that has led you to be involved in saying we need a stronger response from government to protect people from this kind of discrimination?
Absolutely. The one of the really harsh realities of political discrimination is that it interacts with other kinds of discrimination. And in my case, I'm a former employee at Bell Media, currently involved in a lawsuit against them for wrongful dismissal and racial discrimination. Ultimately, what it came down to is that management at Bell Media, some of the folks that oversee the iHeartRadio Talk Network, oversee CTV News, for example. These are some of the Bell Media television and radio properties. They ultimately believe that if you're a Black employee, a Black worker like myself, that you should have certain political views. And if you don't have those views that they think you're supposed to have, more liberal, more left-leaning views, they punish you and question whether you should be counted as part of diversity, as though somehow your Blackness, in my case, is tied to a certain set of political views, which we just know is not just false and not just unfair and illegal, but it's also just immoral and deeply troubling. So the lawsuit I have against them is over that issue. And certainly if you look at their communications, I mean, they've filed a statement of defense in this court case, and they essentially acknowledge they didn't like my political views. They even cite the fact that I interviewed one of your colleagues, Garnett, Kathy Wagenthal, as an example of why my show had to be canceled and I had to be fired, as though she has no right to speak her perspective on the radio, and me as a Black man shouldn't be having conversations with conservatives, apparently. So it's one of the reasons why political discrimination bothers me so much, is that it becomes license to do other kinds of discrimination as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a powerful story. Essentially, you were taken off the radio because of your political views, and in particular, in your situation, it was they expected you to have a particular political perspective because you're Black. Um, uh, uh, so it was kind of the interaction of these two kinds of discrimination, a presumption about what your political views should be based on your race. That's sort of
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, you're exactly right. So for the audience, just by way of background, I was hired during the summer of Black Lives Matter, just a couple months after George Floyd was tragically killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So what you had at that point was a company like Bell Media, like many other companies, looking for tokens. And from my point of view, I said, look, I'm happy to do this job as long as I'm respected and my dignity is acknowledged. And there was a time where that was the case, but it started to disappear over time when I think they realized this is not the kind of Black guy they were looking for. It was not the stereotype, the liberal stereotype of Black people that the media traffics in. They were not getting that. And I think that's when it started to go downhill.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's particularly bizarre that they wouldn't have sort of been aware of your previous work, right? I mean, you have a long track record before being on radio of reflecting on issues from a nuanced but generally conservative perspective, not a kind of knee-jerk partisan, but a thoughtful, substantive conservative perspective. So it's sort of bizarre that they wouldn't have known that. But anyways,
Yeah.
the this whole area of political discrimination, people getting treated poorly in work, threats of having bank accounts frozen, things like that, just because of political opinions that they hold. This is what led me to put forward Bill C-257, a bill that would add political political beliefs or activity as prohibited grounds of discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act, and hoping to see similar efforts at the provincial level. You are featuring a panel that includes me and others at the Strong and Free Network to talk about the issue of political discrimination, Bill C-257. Who are some of the other panelists, and what are some of the other stories or experiences that you're incorporating into that conversation?
Well, first I'll say, that you proposing this legislation in Parliament, and also some of your colleagues in the Senate, was so important and so bold to show people that you don't have to just keep accepting this, that there is a way forward. We can do something about this problem. What I've observed far too often is people, especially conservatives, feeling defeated, as though we have to accept this type of discrimination against us. And I commend you and others for showing that there is a way to, kind of push back and say, no, you don't have to take this. You do deserve protection. Your dignity should be protected. And there are other folks who are championing the cause, I think, that you've started to blaze the trail for, Garnett. So Catherine Marshall, for example, who's a partner at the human rights and employment law firm Levitt Shake. She's seen a number of instances of this type of discrimination from an employment law perspective, representing clients who have gone through this in Ontario. And then we've got two students who are part of our mentorship program, one at York University named Noah Jarvis, the other at the University of Calgary, Liam Dunn, who have encountered these issues on campus. And you mentioned at the top, Garnett, that this is a generational issue, and they will certainly speak to what they're seeing as students today. So when we talk about this being an issue that young people are facing, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is what I'm hearing nonstop. People constantly living in fear that if they say what they think about important things to them and their families and their communities, that they could lose their job, they could lose internships, they could get low grades from a professor who doesn't like their opinion. It's not a healthy thing for democracy, and I think that's what we want to draw attention to at the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, universities were these islands of liberty, even if in a sea of tyranny. And sadly, universities have been at the forefront recently of shutting down speech, limiting discussions, and penalizing people for having political opinions that are unpopular. I remember when I was a student, our campus organization put forward and ultimately passed a motion to ban pro-life clubs from campus. And at the time, this was, I think, 2006. This was actually seen as very radical, that someone would dare to limit free speech on a university campus around that particular issue. But I think, unfortunately, that's just kind of the norm now, that groups and individuals face this kind of discrimination. But it's not just on campus as well, right? I mean, we know that people who work out there in the world, who are posting online about their political views, worry about employment-based discrimination, as you experienced, and other forms of discrimination. And that's why I just think with C-257, we can not repurpose, but just continue to use the existing infrastructure of human rights law. We do it for other kinds of discrimination. If someone shouldn't be fired because of their race, their sexual orientation, their marital status, their religion, why not simply add political beliefs to that existing list?
Yeah, and what I love about the legislation that you proposed, and some of the advocacy around this issue that you've done and your team, is you've drawn attention to the fact that in many provinces and territories, this is already protected grounds. So in Quebec, for example, political conviction is in the law in Quebec. You cannot fire people, discriminate against people on the basis of political conviction. And it's remarkable that in Ontario, there's no law like that, which is shocking to me, and hopefully there will be changes there. But even more importantly, on a federal level, which is where your legislation would make a difference, there's no good reason why we don't have these protections. If it's fine at the provincial level in most of the country. There's no good reason why it can be done federally. So I hope people will see that it's possible we take a stand against this. And that's such an important word for us to focus on too, which is what is possible. Like, we do not have to accept what is being done right now. A better way is forward. A less divisive society is possible. And that's one of the reasons I'm very excited that you're going to be on our stage in a few weeks in Ottawa, because I think your message needs to be heard by more and more people, especially conservatives.
Yeah, thank you. And I think your point about optimism is really important too. Like, just not accepting that things are just going to keep heading in the direction that they are, but that that as conservatives on the side of human rights, on the side of universal dignity, on the side of free and open debate and conversation, that we can and should win these arguments. That there's not some inevitable negative trajectory, but that rather we can do the work and get these things passed. You had mentioned Senator Salma Tulajan as well, and I want to flag that too, that I put forward this bill. We have a parallel version of this bill in the Senate that Senator Salma Tulajan, another a great conservative senator, has put forward. It's S-257. It's rare that the two bills on the same subject would have the same number. It's a fortunate coincidence, actually. So it's C-257 and S-257. Easy to remember those two bills. So, Jamil, it's been great having you on my page. Any final words or thoughts here in reference to political discrimination regarding the conference and what you're working on at Strong and Free Network?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I would just say is, like, one of the reasons it's important that we take on political discrimination is to show conservatives they're not alone. And my message to any conservative: you're not by yourself, no matter how isolating it might feel at your workplace or on your university campus. There's a community of conservatives thriving all across this country. We are building that community at the Canada Strong and Free Network. And I hope you'll be there to see it for yourself. Come to Ottawa if you're not already there. Again, the West in Ottawa, March 22nd and 24th. You can register now, canadastrongandfree.network. Our early bird ticket prices are only around for another few days, so get your tickets while you can.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks everybody for watching. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Jamil. And if not before, I will see you at the conference at the end of March.
Looking forward to it.